Okay, welcome to Storytime with Dan Booker. I appreciate you being here. Look forward to doing this chapter. This was a fun one to write, so we'll get going in just a second here. Just want to let you know that Soleman Man on Top is now out. So hopefully that'll be coming on to Amazon. They'll show and everything. So that'll be number three. And I am working on book number five of Sheriff in a Small Town now. So I'm keeping busy. Let's begin with roller disco fever. Walking all night as extreme fatigue caused him to stop at a tavern down a side road. Opening the door, he weakly walked in, leant heavily against the bar, and asked if he could have some water. He was hungry, but had no money to offer for food or even a room. As he waited for the water, he played pensively with the gold coin the gnomes had given him. The innkeeper handed over a tankard of water and was about to turn away when he noticed the coin. Thought to himself, why would a man so tired and empty and who has gold not use it to get food, drink, and a room? Harry flipped the coin to decide to keep it up or give it. His stomach was rumbling loudly and his body ached. Landed heads, the gnome was shown in the lantern light. The innkeeper gently took the coin and turned it over. The FOG stood out in sharp relief. Realizing the coin was newly minted, he handed it back and looked at Harry with respect, mingled with suspicion. Coins like this were extraordinarily rare. He'd only ever seen one other one, and he had it. See, it's going to be one of those days, isn't it? He'd been walking and found a gnome lying by the side of the road. Poor little guy was lost and exhausted, his strength almost non-existent. The innkeeper brought him to his inn and revived him with good food and ale. The gnome was an aged individual and, like the gnome Perry had met, highly respected. Also, like Perry, the innkeeper had been welcomed to a day of entertainment at the gnome village, then returned fast asleep to his inn. He'd never been able to find the gnome village, but retained fond memories of his adventure. He also retained the coin, which he considered a lucky talisman. He leaned on the counter and tapped the disc. How'd you get that coin? Harry related his own adventure and the assistance he had been able to render Lenditia. The innkeeper showed his own and told Perry to sit down. Dinner was on the house, and he could sleep there for the night plus breakfast in the morning. After a filling repast, a rest in comfortable bed, and a sustaining breakfast, Perry was ready to continue his journey. The innkeeper called him his brother and told him he was welcome to return any time his travels led him nearby. Perry continued to travel in the direction he had come from originally when he saw a cat sitting on a rock beside the road. The cat's eyes were dripping tears on his fine clothing and seemed so distraught that his heart went out to it. He sat down next to the cat and asked what the trouble was. In answer, the cat lifted his feet, which were throbbing and bruised from walking a long way unshod. I'm going to seek my fortune as a highwayman or something to bring a fortune to my friend and family at home. My friend sold me this fine coat and cloak, but had no money to buy me shoes. I've walked a long way, and I fear my adventures are ended before they have even begun. He looked at Perry's shoes in admiration. The shoes you wear are admirable. Would you allow me to try them on? Perry hesitated, but took his shoes off and put them on the cat. Shoes obviously didn't fit, but the cat admired the fine workmanship and sheen on the leather. Forlornly, he took them off and handed them back. Perry placed them on his own feet and stood. You know, there's a town ahead, and I have a gold coin that they may take and trade. Up on my shoulder, and we'll see what the shoe store has to offer. For a moment, the cat looked disdainfully at the thought of hopping on his shoulder. I do not hop on people's shoulders. Perry realized his mistake and squatted down so that his furry friend could climb up with dignity. Walking swiftly, they soon approached the outskirts of the town and then the town center, wherein lie the shops. The town hadn't changed at all since it was first built. The outsides of the shops were all wood framing with wattle and daub between. Signboards swung in the breeze signifying the wares sold inside. As they wandered, they passed several taverns with unusual names: the Fife and Fiddle, the Horse and Horn, even one called the Wandering Ewe, with a picture of an ewe looking particularly lost. Every time Perry slowed down to window shop or admire his surroundings, the cat would kick him with his heels to spur him forward. Down a side street between an apothecary and a hairdresser, they saw the cobblers. Entering, Perry discussed the possibility of trading the gnome coin for shoes for his new friend. As a proprietor and he talked, his furry friend walked around, admiring the shoes, searching for a fitting pair and a pair that would fit. The owner seemed amenable to taking the coin in trade, based on the value of the coin rather than as a talisman for use in friendship to gnomes. Perry took a chair and waited. By the way, we haven't been introduced yet. My name is Perry, and you are? Cat turned and bowed deeply. I'm Cold Puss. Hardly an imposing name for a highwayman, and skilled swordsman, but he shrugged and turned back to the shelves. Let's try on brogues, flats, sandals, slippers, even hush puppies, none of which seemed to inspire the proper look he was aiming for. On a shelf in a corner, he stood in awe before a pair of jeweled high-heeled shoes of great value and exquisite style. He put them on, smiling as they added at least 5 inches to his stature. Now this is more like it, he exclaimed in ecstasy. He paraded around and made darting fencing movements. Unfortunately, the shoes, though elegant, were not of a style that were useful for battle, and he sadly put them back on the shelf. Barry saw a pair on the top shelf out of Puss's line of sight that would work better. They're tall, sturdy, and in a simple fashion, elegant in their own way. He took them down and brought them to Puss, who was sitting on a shoe-fitting stool, about to burst into tears once more. Barry had Puss close his eyes as he placed the boots on his feet. Boots fit perfectly since they were not ordinary boots, but sales models of a select line. More than normal, they were exactly what Puss required, and he once more burst into tears, but this time, tears of joy. Bear was about to settle at the counter when Prince Linus arrived with Cinderella in tow. 7 servants followed behind carrying parcels from a morning of shopping. Seeing Perry and recognizing him, he rushed up and hugged him, thanking him for bringing back his bride. Turning to the proprietor, he told him to give Soleman and his friend whatever they wanted. The sale of the boots was made, and Perry saluted the prince and bowed to Cinderella, now transformed by new clothes and a thorough wash. Be a drink. Outside, Perry and Puss were about to part ways when they decided on a tankard of ale to seal their friendship. In the Wandering Ewe, they discussed Puss's plans for the future, now that he had proper footwear. He decided that instead of being a highwayman, he would be a blade for hire. A hooded man came up to where Perry and Puss were sitting and sat down without being invited. In a low voice, he and Puss discussed the tasking for Puss to prove himself with. Puss pushed Perry's arm so that the man and he could talk in private. Perry rose, bowed, and departed. Before he left, Puss told of a castle not far away where the king was asking for assistance in discovering why the shoes of his 12 daughters were always a complete wreck every morning. It was costing him a fortune to keep buying shoes every day for them, and he was at his wit's end. As they shook hands, Puss emphasized how right up Perry's street this problem was, and he should hot-foot it over to the castle without delay. Perry thought it over and decided that it posed an interesting challenge and would give him a chance to have an excellent meal. It was a well-known fact that kings ate exceedingly well and abundantly. He found his way to the castle without much difficulty, as the king's daughters were the talk of the town. They recalled a gaggle of obdurate strumpets. Calloused as to the fate of those who tried to divine their secrets, they looked upon the detectives who had sought fortune and fame as a challenge that they would easily overcome. What Puss had neglected to state or did not know was that the king expected results from those who promised an answer to the riddle. Each person was given 3 days to solve the problem, after which, if the solution was not forthcoming, their lives were forfeit. Now, the prospect of receiving half a kingdom as a reward was enough to bring detectives from near and far to try their luck. In order to facilitate this undertaking, he reverted to the persona of Soleman. Someone confidently approached the castle gate and asked to speak to the king. It wasn't often that a masked individual was presented before the king, but having identified himself and presented his card, he was soon standing before the throne. He expressed his desire to figure out the secret of the shoes without the benefit of acquiring half the kingdom as recompense. The king scrutinized Soleman and stroked his chin. He was aware of Soleman's reputation and even his recent achievements. Neighboring kings spoke loudly about Soleman's tenacity and his high intelligence. Tugging thoughtfully at his beard, he decided for once to lay his cards on the table before agreeing. There was an openness to Soleman's features, an honesty and integrity they had appreciated, and a reputation that he respected. Before you fully commit yourself, I want you to understand the terms. Many have come to seek the truth, but only for the sake of being awarded half my kingdom. What they forgot was that while success would benefit them greatly, failure would mean they forfeit their life. That's how desperate I am for a solution to this vexing problem. Look out that window at the mound in the distance. There repose the bodies of those who could not find the answer. They had 3 days and nights to discover a solution, but all failed. Out of respect for you and the fact that you do not seek my kingdom as a reward, I offer you this chance to lead without committing. Someone was sure of himself and his abilities, but was he sure enough to risk his life in this attempt? He felt he was. He straightened his posture and stood erect before the king. He pledged to solve the riddle or to face the consequences with dignity. The king clapped his hands and had a servant take Soleman to his room, where he would be provided with a change of clothes, food, and a bed. The princesses had all heard from behind a curtain, and a few were no longer as confident as they had been. This one is different. He has come out of sympathy for our father's plight, and not for a reward. Gildas looked down with disdain at Soleman's broad, retreating back as he was led to his room. This one's no different. He's just different in what motivates him, that's all. He'll fail as have all the others. The youngest looked through the curtain as Soleman climbed the stairs. But if he succeeds, what will become of us who have caused the death of so many? She turned wide eyes toward her sisters. Gildas looked with disgust at the trepidations of her siblings. We'll fail. Besides, we're the king's daughters. Even if he somehow succeeds, nothing will be done to us. We are above all and have nothing to fear. Come, let us prepare for the night's meeting. Evening approached, and most in the castle were readying themselves for slumber. The middle princess, who was quite attractive, put on a silk nightgown so sheer as to be almost transparent. She left her robe open and entering Soleman's chamber. Someone was at the window looking out and turned at the sound of the door opening. She sashayed in with a beguiling smile and offered Soleman a nightcap. Soleman took a sip of the wine and realized something was not quite right. It had a slightly metallic taste that was not due to the silver goblet. He realized it had been drugged. Well, he needed to empty the contents, but with the princess staring at him, he was at a loss how. Slowly, he lowered the cup from his lips and looked at her as admiringly and passionately as he could. By the tinting of his pajama bottom, she could see his rising interest. I'm sorry. I love writing. I like that part. As if memorized, she walked slowly towards him. Her lips parted and she rose on her toes for a kiss. Soleman put everything he had into it while at the same time tossing the contents of the goblet behind him out the window. When they parted, she still had her eyes closed and her body swayed. When she opened her eyes, he was just lowering the goblet from his lips. a wondrous draught, and almost as sweet and intoxicating as your kiss. She blushed and, taking the goblet, went back to the room all the princesses shared. Entering their bedroom, she was told to dress appropriately for the excursion. They dressed in tight satin shorts that emphasized elegant legs and shapely behinds, sparkled two tops that emphasized their bosoms, satin baseball caps over braided hair with plenty of sparkling jewelry about their person. They were set for the evening. Harry remained in his pajama bottoms and lay on bed, feigning sleep. As the princesses left their room, they opened his door to see him soundly sleeping. The rattle of their clamped skates made slight noises as they descended the stairs and walked swiftly outside. A stretched carriage was waiting at the end of the gravel drive. They clambered in, settled down, and yelled in unison for the driver to hit it. The carriage flew. Someone had dressed and watched them depart, following close behind them. His years of practice in keeping invisible in darkness was of enormous benefit, and he reached the carriage just as they told the driver to get going. Leaping onto the back, he held tightly as the vehicle sped through the town. It stopped, as he had surmised it would, based on their outfits, at the roller disco. In the carriage, the princesses had teed down their skates over their shoes and rolled enthusiastically into the building. Soleman entered and found a hiding place where he could watch unobserved. The princesses were joined by 12 young men dressed in tight bell-bottom pants and open shirts with gold chains around their necks. The matching gold medallions of their kingdom gleamed under the bright lights. As they spun around the rink under flashing lights and to the music, he wondered how to prove what he was seeing. He needed evidence. He gathered matchbooks, napkins, even some of the jewelry that flew off as they were spun around. He had something else, something that would definitely identify whom they were with. One of the men provided just that. He took a broken heart necklace that matched one the older wore and twirled it over his head. The band broke, sending the charm in Soleman's direction. It was engraved with the princess's name and part of his. Now, this was all he needed. Placing the items in his pocket, he made a dash for the exit. Catching a carriage heading back to the castle, he dropped off outside and climbed into his open window. By the time the princesses returned, he was fast asleep. Good morning, he spoke to the king in private. Sorry I watched them depart and attempted to follow, but I lost their trail. I only know the direction in which they traveled and where that particular road leads. I'll try again tomorrow with hopefully better success. The king looked dismayed. He had more information now than previously, but not enough to satisfy his curiosity. He wanted to find out where they went and have proof. Well, you still have 2 more nights and days. Hopefully you can acquire the information within that time. Otherwise, his finger pointed reluctantly out the window as a reminder of what failure could lead to. The princesses slept late and arrived downstairs by lunchtime. They spent the day entertaining Soleman with energetic games and talks. Shuffleboard was the preferred game for the early afternoon, leading up to a few games of snooker, frisbee throwing, several games of tag, and followed with volleyball once the evening became cooler. Soleman was paired with a middle and youngest sister. Their tight t-shirts and high shorts distracted them enough that they lost the game, but they did so with good humor. Later that evening, after a sumptuous supper, the princesses took stock of their situation. Well, he's been running ragged all day, so we should sleep pretty well tonight. The middle one, who had taken rather a shine to Soleman, suggested a game of sardines to top the evening off. The suggestion was well received, and she rushed off to tell him. In his room, he had just changed into his pajama bottoms, and with the door burst open, she announced that they were going to play one final game. Soleman had never played sardines and requested the rules. She hastened to explain. Okay, you hide, we all separate and try to find you. Suddenly her eyes gleamed with mischief. Once someone finds you, it isn't over. They get in with you, wherever you are hidden. Then the next one does. and the same until everyone is packed in. She pressed her body, she pressed in body to body and wriggled as she leered at him. Sounds fun, doesn't it? She pulled Soleman out of their room. He arrived into the princess's bedroom in bare feet and pajama bottoms. He ran to be so exposed among so many fair maidens that they felt sympathy for him and lost their dresses. They stood in elegant lingerie and kicked off their shoes. They covered their eyes and began to count to 30. The sight of so much beauty held him fast momentarily, and then he sped off excitedly in search of a suitable hiding place. Rushing about, he mentally counted down the remaining seconds. At a disadvantage of not knowing the castle layout and realizing that the time had almost expired, he took the first door that came to hand. It was a linen closet, and though large and the many shelves made the available standing room small. Now he just had to wait. His mind wandered on the picture of the princesses standing before him, partially clothed in the essentials. His interest in the game rose again, and he was curious to find out who would arrive first. As the minutes ticked off, he began to wonder if he had been played for a fool. Or so great an enticement, it was no wonder he would rush off to wait in expectation for them. But was that only half the plan? Were they now laughing at him and dressing to leave while he was sequestered wherever he had found a place to hide? The more he thought about it, the more he was convinced that it was so. Becoming angry at being fooled so easily, he slowly opened the door. The middle princess was standing there with her hand on the door when it opened. She put her arms on his shoulder and pushed him inside. I was hoping to be the first. She closed the door and her fingers were on the lock, ready to keep the others at bay. Deciding that the more the merrier, she turned to face Soleman. His firm, muscular frame was not his only outstanding feature that kept her attention. She rushed into his arms, and when the door opened again, they were embracing. The middle princess was pulled off, and the second oldest took her place. Others followed, and the tight room became even tighter. The scent of perfume filled the closet, making Soleman's head swim. The closeness of so many warm bodies made his senses reel. They kissed and fondled him until his mind was in a frenzy of emotional chaos. They led him to his bedroom and all kissed him good night. The elder sister grinned as she changed. Yeah, he's going to be awful busy for a while, so let's go while the going's good. They dressed hastily and sped out the door to the waiting carriage. In his room, Soleman was splashing cold water on his face, trying to get himself under control. The sound of many skates clanging in the hallway awakened his sense of duty and his reason for his presence. He dressed hastily and dashed to the stables to acquire a horse. Racing in pursuit, he knew exactly where to go. He arrived just as the princesses were walking into the ring laughing, singing and taking deep draughts from hip flasks. Soleman found a convenient place to tie up the horse and where it would not be seen. Walking in the darkened ring, he realized it was neon night, and everyone was wearing glow-in-the-dark bands and necklaces. The limbo bar was set up on either side of the ring, which was automatically raising and lowering. The couples were weaving to and fro, bending and contorting to slide under the ever-changing bar, and in general having a wonderful time. Harry watched during the interval as they danced close. Their bodies were swaying with a gentle beat of the music, their hands rolling over to each other's bodies, their lips pressed together in heated passion. Seems the game of sardines had awoken something in them as well. Someone dodged here and there, collecting evidence once more. A medallion, a pair of lace panties, a hair comb, all identifiable and incriminating. He placed all his additional evidence into a commodious pocket and tore off to ride back to the castle. Harry leapt into the saddle and, kicking his heels, he took off with a hearty, "Hi-yo, Silver!" On hearing the sound outside, the couples realized that Soleman had discovered their secret and was now heading to the king to present his evidence. Even from a distance, he heard the frantic sounds of the women getting into the carriage and the men mounting their horses, charging to cut him off. The chase was on. Someone had the lead, but his pursuers were closing rapidly. He could hear the shrill cries of the princesses insisting that the driver whip them faster. The horses, not the princesses. The men on the individual horses fanned out and sought to box Soleman in. As he arrived at the gate, he roared for the guards to close it securely as soon as the gates, those behind, entered. The men arrived first with the carriage close behind. Soleman leapt off his horse and called loudly to rouse the castle. From within the castle, Puss, now in boots, who had been offering his services to the king, burst through the door and with his sword at the ready, carrying another for parry. The two stood ready to do battle. The princes emerged charged en masse. The princesses sought to enter the castle to hide in their rooms, but the way inside of the castle was blocked and the grounds illuminated as torches were swiftly lit. The king arrived in haste, pulling on his robe. Sight of that met his eyes of the 12 princes and about to gang up on Soleman and a small cat was more than he could stand. Pulling a horn from a hook next to the door, he called for his knights. They arrived, sword in hand, dressed in leopard-spotted pajama onesies with bunny-footed slippers. They soon had the courtyard surrounded. Princes realized they were beaten before the fight began. The king sent a messenger to the castle of the princesses for their father to come and get them, and in the meantime, they were guarded by the knights. The princesses fell to their knees, beseeching forgiveness. He turned angrily towards them. As for you, who have caused the deaths of so many, you are no longer welcome to this castle. I disown you all. The princesses were summarily banished with only the minimal clothes on their backs. As they left, the middle one looked imploringly toward Soleman, who lowered his eyes. Their punishment was just, and he could do nothing. In fact, it was far less than they deserved. Herod walked warmly inside. He left the evidence on the table and departed as the king from the neighboring kingdom arrived. The prince's father was furious, for he was in a similar position as the king here. Now both had found the answer for the riddles they sought to solve. They were joined together as friends. The princes also were banished, losing even their horses. Herod, realizing he was no longer needed, left quietly and discreetly. When the king turned to thank Perry, he was surprised that his hero was no longer present. He nodded sagely, understanding that Soleman would not stay to be thanked. It was his way to vanish after completing his mission, going quietly like a pair of ballet slippers. The next chapter is Cobbler's Cavern. So we're talking about a cave in the next one. And that's it for today. So I appreciate you being here. I hope you enjoyed this chapter. I did. Today is Tuesday, so we'll be reading the next one on Friday. I hope you'll be here, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you do, put something down in the comments. I'm going to leave this on for a couple of minutes. And let's talk about, have any of you ever decided to do some writing and write books? As you can see, I've got a few out. And I'm going to be working, writing them as long as I can. But I'm curious to know if anybody here has ever wanted to start writing. The primary thing I learned after doing this now for close to, 5 or 6 years is just to start. Don't wait. Do some writing on a piece of paper. Write a sentence, write 2 sentences, and then just see where you can take it, see where it can go. And over time, you'll find out that you can get these pretty far. So it's a lot of fun to do. I've enjoyed writing all my books. I think some of these are my favorite. I'm going to point out my favorites to you. So some of my favorites, The Reluctant Left Hand of God, that is a ball. Obviously, The Sheriff in a Small Town, Soleman. A Mystery in My Pocket is one of the unique ones. That's where I first started doing my mystery stories. I'm going to see if I could do those. The Time Is series were my first books. Time Is was my first attempt. And I'll show you something if I can find it. Hold on. I'll show you. Let me move this out of the way. Hold on. I'm going to show you what the first copy of that book looks like. I'm not very proud of it. If I can find it, I can show it to you. Now, I know I've got it. It's hard to see with all this stuff in the way of that all these other books. Here it is. Found it. So I'll show you what a first attempt, and this is not what you should publish. It is your first attempt. You want to wait. So this was the first one. It was badly formatted. It wasn't even numbered. I don't think I even had. Yeah, I had chapter headings, but yeah, the back wasn't even much better, as you can see. So that was my first attempt at publishing. What was inside wasn't bad, and then afterwards, that was what I came up afterwards. Better front, better back, better formatting, and that took me about 6 tries to get right. So, but writing is a lot of fun if you've ever thought about it. It's something to do. It keeps you occupied, and I love doing it. I'm going to continue to do it. So I hope you'll continue to see what I've got going, and be here to listen as I continue to read from them. So that's it for today. I appreciate you being here very much. Be good and be good to yourselves. We'll talk on Friday. Bye.